anything else I'm missing? All right, well, I guess we'll just get into it. So, we kind of, Stephen and I spent some time thinking about, some demos to do, and this really came out of, because, well, I didn't have volunteers for speakers, and then I said to myself, well, I'll do a home lab thing, and then one thing led to another, and it gets away from me. So we're really developed something to really talk through the question of how to do a CD pipeline when we need to involve data integrity tests and really other tests that are part of that. And really, you had a great line with that because I'm going to forget half of my notes as I'm going through this.
It's all good.
So
at a prior company, a company that made BI software, our most critical test was one that cloned our customers, ran a test suite on them, and made sure that none of the numbers changed before we released any new piece of software. And when Chris was showing me some of his stuff, I went, wait, we can do that easily these days? The old version had taken literally years for a fully staffed team. So we played around with that idea. And this is kind of what we threw together so that you can leverage production data for testing before your code reaches production.
Yeah, and this has really, I think, been, and on a personal note, probably the most fun I've had, in the technology space in like a year or so. But this is, my wife will give me a bad time that if I wasn't doing this professionally, I'd be doing it personally. So it's a good thing I'm doing this. And with the pitch, there is a recording in the back with it because apparently they thought that this would be the mug they wanted to represent a demo initially. So yeah, that was my reaction too. So I'm going to go through and talk about what this demo is going to do for just a couple of minutes, and had to learn how to actually use Google Slides in the process. So this has been a whole learning experience for me over the last month. So what we're going to do is we have a couple of Kubernetes clusters that are running out there, a production cluster and a staging cluster. And the app that we're going to be playing with it's just a fake barbecue ordering app that one of our marketing guys came up with, built it in Go, uses a MongoDB backend. But it was something I was familiar enough with that I figured we could probably get this thing going. So what this process is going to do is scale down Mongo on the staging cluster side and then trigger a migration of the underlying data volume. It waits until that data volume is actually done migrating, scales the application back up, and then deploys the new manifest into staging. So the use case with this is I'm doing something to the Mongo database, and what I'm actually going to show you is we're going to move it from 6.0.1 to 6.0.2 and see what happens. So we deploy the new manifests in the staging cluster that start using the copy of the production data. And of course, all of this is, we're not messing with anything on the production side of things. From there, we're going to start performing integration tests on the staging environment. And this is actually triggered with a GitHub action that's going to go and run a series of data integrity tests. Now, of course, this is, for anybody looking to do this, is kind of bring your own integrity test, right? Because you know your data for what you're trying to do here. Once it passes that test, or fails it, then we're going to stop it. But when presumably it's going to pass that test, we're going to deploy the new manifests into production. Now, as that deployment's happening, it's actually going to do a canary deployment and watch, I need to hit it one more time. So it scales it, or actually redeploys, and then scales traffic and checks metrics against Prometheus. And depending on how you actually set this pipeline up, there's a few checks that we can put in here, whether that's going to be a manual approval for when you're putting this into production, or whether you want approval if we are outside of a particular threshold. And that's really what I was missing in labs previously when I've been using pipeline software, is some way to have a gating factor as I'm taking the same manifest through multiple environments. So that's anything I'm missing there?
Yeah, so basically high level, it's automating the entire SDLC. It's using the same automation for all changes to the app as well as all changes to the database, running the same validations on both. So if anything breaks either one, we realize it, we roll back that change before it ever destabilizes production. And hey, we're also going to go ahead and test with production data in staging because we can.
All right, so a little bit about this app. It's a barbecue ordering app. So you can show I don't have any tricks up my sleeve. I'm going to go ahead and put together a new quick order.
You have new items in the ordering menu since I last ordered.
We've done a few tests of this. All right, place the order. Make sure that shows up in. These are just obviously documents inside of the Mongo database. Okay, now as part of this life cycle, I'm going to trigger an upgrade from 6.01 to 6.02. So all of the manifests in this directory are really what make up this application. So Mongo database, front end, and you'll notice a couple of objects that I'm also going to explain a little more later. So let's go ahead and save this. Where'd I put that?
So when he commits this, it's going to go ahead and kick off his CI process. When it finishes, it's going to trigger deployment and walk through everything we just talked about. So in just a moment, we'll be able to see that deployment kick off.
And so Armory here, I'm using a CD as a service product from them to coordinate all of this. So if you saw those lines, that was actually all of the API connections that are happening. And I'll walk through this in a little more detail after I show this. So this first step is we are waiting for the database migration to actually happen. That's actually the Portworx piece, which is what I play with most of the time. So what that's doing is it's taking the PVC of the Mongo database and copying it over to the staging environment. Now it's not doing any of the other objects, and really my thought in this is it's, as part of a pipeline, we want the pipeline to actually deploy the manifests, but we can't do that and have that magically get the data over to the other side. So what this is doing is it's actually using a little open source tool to first trigger that migration, or excuse me, the migration's triggered by the pipeline, and then it's using this open source tool to watch to make sure that migration actually completes.
Yeah, and to give you an idea of how that migration works, Portworx has a CRD that is literally just called migration, and when you deploy it, it starts the migration, and you can monitor it to wait for it to finish. So that's what we're doing.
And so, like anything with Kubernetes, and this is probably, I think, some of the first times where I really was excited when I was first learning about Kubernetes is the extensibility, especially just around CRDs, and being able to, whether that's extending with certificate management or load balancers or all of these things that made my life, as an ex-data center guy, my life a lot easier. So all we're doing is that we're extending or adding CRDs into a Kubernetes system. So when you trigger something like this, it can move that PVC or really whatever objects you're trying to get over. So now we have this application deployed inside of staging. We can check on that. With a little shortcut here from Armory by grabbing this preview link. So I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that my data actually made it over.
And that preview link is a kind of useful thing for testing. If you have like ephemeral environments you need to run like per branch, it can spin up just a URL you can use to access it, even if it's not got Ingress set up. So made the demo a little easier.
All right.
And we can see that he's got his order in there.
So now we are running the set of integration tests that are actually the GitHub action. So this was triggered by Armory as part of the integration test, and I'll bring this guy up here real quick. 1 minute ago, that looks like the one that probably already finished.
Yep, I think it already finished.
That wasn't fast enough. Okay.
So in this case, we're doing an async callback, which is useful for tools like GitHub because all their APIs are structured as start job. Okay, cool. How many tools have you used that can call start job and then can't wait for it to finish easily? So we handed it back a URL when it finished, called it back, and told us whether to continue or not. So.
And by the way, this is where I actually cheated, because instead of writing a proper data integrity test, I'm looking for the Mongo version here. And it simply failed because it's looking for Mongo 6.02 because, I do this for fun, but I guess not that much for fun. It was enough to there was a lot of firsts in here for me. I mean, GitHub Actions, I actually thought for a moment, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to have a little Flask app that's going to return the amount of documents and check some things. And then I said to myself, well, I kind of want it to fail, so I showed Steven this thing, and the one line of code that was random, pass or fail, and was returning a code. And said, you know what? I'm just going to put it in a GitHub action.
But if that bugs anyone, you're accepting PRs that give you, an integration test for the barbecue app, right?
If anyone wants, a do nothing application.
Let's hop back over to that parent pipeline.
And so we can see in here that it actually failed. And so it did not move on to production. Now, me being me and the ex-infrastructure guy that I am, I'm going to go ahead and plow ahead and actually upgrade this to 6.0.3 to see if I have better luck instead of fixing the problem. Are there infrastructure guys in the room? I really should have checked on that. Oh, okay.
I used to be an infrastructure guy, and I've done it before, so it's all good. I mean, it can roll back, but at some point we want to get on a new version, right? Maybe there's a CVE fixed.
All right, let's see if we get better. That's not the. Thinking about it. There it is.
Honestly, doing a database upgrade via cell phone just feels a little too real.
There it is. No, I just had to hit the button. That's my other failing here. All right, we're gonna let this run again.
So in just a second, after the CI workflow finishes, it's going to use GitHub Actions, kick off a new job. And then we'll watch it go ahead and do the database migration, and this time, make it to production. There it goes.
Any questions so far? Thoughts, comments, death threats? Oh, sorry.
Quick question. So when you're migrating data from production to staging, is it just data migration or you're migrating schema as well?
So I am actually just doing the data migration. So it is grabbing the PVC. So there, if I jump into and actually run, let's see, what was my context? Cluster 02. The PVC shows up, right? You can see that MongoDB PVC and the data underneath it. So it is usable by Kubernetes, but I'm not moving anything else.
So if the schema changes, then this thing would break?
Yes, like if I went in and say change the MongoDB reference to use another PVC, then absolutely, yeah.
Well, and if you were to ship a new version of your app that needs a new schema and doesn't properly handle the old schema and doesn't properly update it, it's going to break.
Yeah. Let's face it, if you're really doing this, you'd use a Mongo operator and all of that type of stuff, and it would be much more complete than what I'm doing in my office at 2 a.m.
PVC is read-write many? What's that? Is it read-write many PVC setup?
This one we did set as actually RWX, yeah. Yeah, and this gets more into Portworx specifically, but yeah, it takes block devices, kind of puts them together in a pool, and then can hand them out from there. But because it's in at that layer, I can do a couple of tricks with it. But yeah, in this case, it is RWX in order to handle. It was really a cheat to handle the pod scaling easier, so we can replace the new one while we're deleting the old one.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right. Well, that went better.
Yeah.
So now we've actually successfully passed the integration tests with the GitHub action. So we're moving this on to production.
Did you want to pull up production?
Yeah. I need to actually click on it.
Yeah.
And this is running.
So what this one's doing is we're deploying those two deployment objects. We're doing canary deployment with them. So you can see right now we're only sending half the traffic to the new version, half of it's going to the old version. And we're also running some automated tests. In this case, these are querying Prometheus, and we the tests we did are pretty simple. One of them is checking CPU usage, making sure it's not out of control, and the other one is triggering analyzing the number of warnings that MongoDB has logged. So hey, if either of those changes unexpectedly, it would automatically roll back. Except we've got all set to manual because it helps us talk. But as you can see, hey, it passed, so maybe we want to increase traffic to 100%, and then we'll run those again.
All right, so it's going to continue scaling this up.
Yeah, so as you can see,
now
traffic's at 100%, and we ran another analysis, and hey, this time it detected an issue in our MongoDB. So that
Which
might
I'm
be a
going to
good
plow
spot.
on anyway.
Oh, I
Because,
thought we were
yeah,
going to
why
roll
not?
back, but hey, up to you.
What's doing the canary analysis?
So in this case, Armory CD as a service has built-in automated canary analysis, and it's running the queries against Prometheus. Supports multiple different metric providers. Great
I
question.
got to find it here. So yeah, so behind the scenes, what's really, let me get rid of the terminal here. What's doing all of that workflow control is this YAML file here, where we're starting on, where we have targets that we're defining and deciding what manifest we want to put on which target. And these depend on statements are really the clue as to what's happening. So the first thing that triggers is this migrate prod DB to staging. It's going to delete the current migration object, scale down staging, and because the deployment definition says we're going to deploy that migrate.yaml file that I showed you, there's a post webhook that's actually running that kubectl wait command, waiting for a final status for that migration is done. So it's just sitting there querying the migration object, right, that you can just spit out with YAML and says, okay, we succeeded, we're good to move on. Once that happens, it deploys into staging, because that depends on migrate prod DB to staging, and then after that deployment runs the integration test webhook. Now, all of these webhooks, if we really want to get into it, and this is out there, by the way, so if anyone wants the link to this repository, it's let me know and I'll send it over. But that's what's actually going out to GitHub to trigger those integration tests to run. Once that's successful, if not, it just hangs out there. Staging stays, so you can do any analysis on it. Once that's successful, it's going to move on to production, which depends on staging being successful, and has a rollout strategy, and this is where all of the actual canary logic is in there, where it's saying, all right, we're looking for these metrics. If we go, I believe that's all the way at the end, right? Yeah. This section right here. So that's what it's actually pulling from in order to check, hey, these are within the bounds we're looking at. So
yeah, and basically the metrics are literally just any metric in your metric provider native query language. There's a templating language there, so you can easily filter to just the new version, not the old. But
yeah, I think that's it. Is there anything?
Any questions?
This is kind of a sort of related to stations. I guess I'm used to doing
So this could have done a blue-green deployment if we wanted it to into production. The reason for the stop off at staging is to be able to run some more invasive tests, because otherwise, and actually this would be a good question, because I'm not even mediocre at pipeline stuff. So when would you want to do this in staging versus in the deployment? And my thought would usually be more invasive and more time to actually fix some things before a more mass deployment into, say, a blue-green sort of thing. But
so I think of your goal of any deployment strategy as being mitigate risk. So as much testing as you can do before you get to production, the lower your risk is when you do get to production. Because if you have an issue you haven't found yet, it's going to break someone. And for comparison, one of my customers does payments processing. If they break production, even if it's only like handling 1% of their traffic, that's credit cards failing to pay. That costs them money literally every second that it's out. So they run tests in staging first. When you get to production, we used a canary deployment. This tool also supports blue-green. Which one you do tends to depend on your application. If your application supports running 2 versions in parallel, you can reduce risk further with a canary strategy because it allows you to decrease it so it's not 100% of traffic moving at once. But they're very similar.
yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, everything we did in staging, you can do in a blue-green deployment before sending traffic over as well.
Presumably, if this wasn't a lab, staging would be a smaller environment than my production ones, but
Yeah. And that, the other one I'll call out on a blue-green is around a database upgrade. That's assuming you're running a database that can run 2 versions in parallel cleanly, and a lot of them can't. And at which point, doing it in staging can decrease that risk around the database upgrade as well.
Which a lot when we're dealing with, databases that are, especially with configurations that are declarative, there can be, at least it makes me nervous on some of the upgrade paths. So having something there to do validation is, I like quite a bit. Yeah?
Yeah, doing the migration as a CRD is pretty cool. I'm wondering if there's a way to deal with the issue of doing some data transformation in a process, deal with like redactions or sensitive data that you don't want to.
That is a good question. And this is just moving the PVC from one location to another. And that sounds like an excellent topic for the game table, because like how much is that going to invalidate an integrity test, but at the same time you may not be able to move it over in the same way, in which case, I don't know, having some way of doing an approximation of that.
As a CRD, that's pretty cool. It's nice and clean. You can just kind of put that step in there somehow. That'd be nice.
And that's a good thought.
I would say, speaking from experience, move the data first and then delete the meetup. Don't try to do them both at the same time.
A prior employer of mine had a process where it could clone to a second production-like cluster in the production environment, and then it ran some app-specific anonymization scripts, because good luck doing anonymization of data that's not going to break your app, that's not schema-specific. And then it copied that down to dev clusters for like devs to use on their laptops. But that gets a lot more in-depth.
I should have done the anonymizing with this though as one of the steps, so you all didn't see like my level 7 vegan beans.
That's true. We should have changed your username. We could have changed it from C Crow to C Raven.
That's oh.
Sorry, I couldn't resist. What's the difference between Crow and a Raven?
Yeah, is this a setup for a dad joke?
It's a setup for a dad joke.
Okay, no idea.
Crow has 8 pinion feathers, Raven has 9, so the difference between a crow and a raven is a matter of opinion.
All right.
Any other questions?
We got that on the recording, right? Because that would be perfect. Yeah, and this genuinely has been a ton of fun for me to play with and learn. So I appreciate you all being willing to sit through it. And any other questions, certainly let us know. And as one last threat, we always need people to talk. So home labs, whatever you're working on, let myself, Joaquin know. We are always looking for content. All right, that's it.